All right, the last empires we need to look at today are in India. Those are the Maurya and Gupta dynasties, and these two dynasties are going to form India's golden age. If you recall, when we were first talking about India in Unit 1, India is pretty diverse, and that makes it hard to unify. So, most of Indian history, we've seen a lot of separate kingdoms, and that was even true after the Aryans came in. They broke up India into a lot of small kingdoms that fought each other. The last ruler to try and unite India was Alexander the Great. And remember, when he came in, he put the Indus Valley under his control, but after his death, a general of his tried to rule India as an empire. And across the rest of southern India, you had a lot of other kingdoms. So one of those kings was a guy named Chandragupta Maurya. He was a warlord, and he wanted to try and unify India. And he will use his army to conquer northern India, expel the Greeks, and create a new empire we call the Mauryan Empire. The Mauryan government was centralized, like a lot of the other empires we've seen. Very organized government. They built roads, collected taxes, tried to increase trade along that Silk Road that we've discussed before. Chandragupta was also known for being paranoid. He was constantly afraid of assassins. He surrounded himself with bodyguards, trained a secret police to try and hunt down any spies or potential defectors. So, on the one hand, he was a really strong military leader. On the other hand, he was also really paranoid after his conquest about what might happen to him. Later, his grandson Ashoka became king, and Ashoka is known as one of India's greatest rulers. When he was emperor, he was, like his father, a Hindu. But after a violent battle with a kingdom in the east called Kalinga, he decided to give up warfare and converted to Buddhism. And Buddhism is really going to shape Ashoka's rule. And a lot of historians would say that's one of the reasons he was such a great empire was the influence of Buddhism. So as emperor, after he converted to Buddhism, Ashoka will reject violence as a means of conquest. And by that point, it's important to note that everything you already see on the map was part of his empire. So maybe easier to reject violence and conquest after you've already conquered everything. But nevertheless, he adopts Buddhism. And one of the most important things he did was establish a law code called the Edicts of Ashoka. It was kind of part law code and part work of philosophy. And a lot of it you'll see kind of the influence of Buddhism in his thoughts. We'll look at a few examples of it later. And just like Hammurabi established his law code and these pillars throughout Babylon, Ashoka is going to do the same thing. We see these large pillars and stone monuments that have his edicts or his laws throughout the empire. Another thing he does, this sort of shows his Buddhist belief, is help establish a lot of these stupas. You hopefully saw what a stupa was when you were doing your Buddhism project, but a stupa is a Buddhist monument that acts as a place of worship and meditation. And he's going to build these throughout northern India. And he'll also send missionaries out, and this is really key. If we think about Buddhism today, we don't see a lot of Buddhism in India. Hinduism still dominates the Indian subcontinent when it comes to religion. But you do see Buddhism all over the rest of Asia. And that is thanks in large part to Ashoka and his Buddhist Mauryan dynasty. We're eventually going to see missionaries come into China and other parts of Southeast Asia. When Buddhism spreads in China, China being a cultural hearth, those ideas are going to spread elsewhere to Japan and Korea and other places as well. So under Ashoka, India is united because he's a Buddhist. Things are peaceful. There's a lot of trade and prosperity. A lot of historians kind of see this as the start of India's, or potential start of India's golden age. But after Ashoka died, the empire fell into decline, and then it's going to divide into a number of kingdoms like it had before Ashoka. Here are a few examples of the laws, of the texts on the Edicts of Ashoka. And like Hammurabi, he put these throughout the empire. You can see in the first one up there, he talks about having established new roads and putting resources like medicine and trees and wells along the roads. He established this idea that India should be tolerant of other religions. He was a Buddhist, but he recognized pretty explicitly in his edicts that he thought all religions needed to interact and share their ideas. So he talks about the growth of the essentials of all religions. You can see how he talks about mercy on criminals. He wants uniformity in the law, but also mercy to those sentenced to death, which might consider unusual for an emperor. And then there's one at the bottom here about respecting Dharma. In this case, not the Hindu idea of Dharma, but the Buddhist teachings, which are also called Dharma. So kind of gives you a sense of not only sort of his law code, but also how this is a work of philosophy as well. You can see Ashoka's influence, still today in Asia. If you look at the Indian flag, in the center is this spoked wheel, and that was a symbol of Ashoka. You can see on the left here these 3 lions on a pillar with the wheel above them. These were on top of many of the pillars of Ashoka that contained his law codes, so it sort of became an emblem of Ashoka, but then eventually for India too. And then you can also see in this map some of the places that Buddhism spread. There's pretty good evidence there were Buddhists in the Hellenistic world, in Athens and Alexandria, and they might have influenced some of the thinkers there. We will eventually even see the story of Buddha show up in medieval Christianity. So his influence in spreading Buddhism is going to be really key for understanding religion in Asia too. So later on, by the time we get into the 4th century AD, we see another empire rise in India. That's the Gupta Empire. This started under the reign of Chandragupta I. Not the same guy as the Mauryan emperor, but he does keep the same name. One of these things where emperors want to show their lineage or their authority, they're going to recognize themselves by great titles, like Chandragupta. He, again, is going to reunite the Indian subcontinent. Not as extensive as the Mauryans were under Ashoka, but still going to be a great empire in northern India. It was like the Mauryan Empire in its centralization, but it was less centralized. It gave more authority to local rulers. It made alliances with local chieftains and village leaders to sort of decentralize the government a little bit. Unlike the Mauryan Empire, the Guptas were a Hindu empire. So you're going to see a revival of Hinduism in India. And this actually is eventually going to sort of push out Buddhism. But the Gupta also recognized and tolerated other faiths as well. The Gupta Empire is really going to start India's golden age. This is the height of trade, of prosperity, of peace, art, culture. And we kind of see that at the start of Chandragupta II. And here on the left, you can see a coin that has Chandragupta on it, and he's one of the ones that issued these coins. And you see these coins kind of scattered throughout this area along the Silk Road. So we know the Gupta were a trading empire. So you can see in the map, they imported silk and spices from China and Southeast Asia. They exported cotton to China. And then they're exporting their goods like spices to Europe. That's going to be really key later on when we get to the Middle Ages. And then cotton down into Africa. We'll talk more about the Silk Road tomorrow, but India is right there at the center of the Silk Road, running roughly from the coast of China into India and through the Arab world to the coast, along with some branches out into Central Asia. So India is kind of right along that trade route, neither the end nor the beginning, which means they will trade with a lot of people. You can see in some of the examples of art here, some of these are from Buddhist iconography, some of it is Hindu, but the art of the Gupta dynasty is going to influence other people in South and Southeast Asia. The idea of sort of the stupas the Mauryans built are going to be modified to build other Hindu temples, and those will eventually spread. The ideas will spread through trade to other parts of China to lead to things like the pagoda. So you're going to see a lot of influence of Gupta art. Other achievements, they were good astronomers. They established a solar calendar. Most of the people were using lunar calendars based on the cycle of the moon. This one was based on the rotation of the Earth around the sun. And they established the Earth is round. Mathematically, India is going to be really important in figuring out some really important concepts that aren't going to hit Europe until much later. The decimal system, as we know it today, was established by the Gupta. The idea of zero as a number rather than just nothing, which again is important in that decimal system. And they had a relatively accurate measure of pi. A lot of medical ideas come out of the Gupta dynasty. They started printing medicinal guides that had plants as well as diseases classified. They did some forms of plastic surgery. Evidence they may have done inoculations, kind of like in vaccinations, cesarean sections. These are all really advanced ideas, and to be able to establish these ideas, you need to have a strong, stable government culture, and that's what the Gupta dynasty had. Around the 400s, you will see the empire weaken. So since they were a little more decentralized, some parts of the empire are going to get more and more independence, and they'll start to break away from the Guptas. Also, the trade routes in Central Asia were cut off by nomadic peoples. Again, we've talked about a lot of nomadic people from the steppes of Asia. In this case, a group of people called the White Huns, who were cousins of the other Huns that we saw in Rome. They're going to start invading India because the trade was disrupted. The Gupta Empire is going to be weaker and not as wealthy. The military is going to try to hold off the invaders, but they can't get paid because of the lack of trade. And that makes the military unstable. So by 550, the Gupta Empire falls. It's going to divide India into a lot of small kingdoms, as we'd seen before. But they're going to leave a lasting legacy across India. For more, look in Chapter 7, Sections 1 and 2.